Jake stood at the edge of the planet's dense jungle, scanning the horizon through his helmet's visor. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the dark green trees that stretched endlessly in every direction. His team had been assigned to assist the Kailari, an alien species known for their strength and warrior-like culture. They had been at war with a neighboring species for years, and the humans were here to provide support. Today was different, though. Jake's team had been sent on a simple mission: check the supply route and assist any Kailari who needed help. But nothing was ever simple on this planet. The jungle was alive with the sounds of alien creatures, some of them dangerous. As Jake adjusted the strap on his rifle, he heard a rustling behind him. He spun around, hand instinctively moving to his weapon. His eyes widened when he saw her. Elira, the Kalari warrior. She stood there a few feet away, her tall, powerful frame almost blending in with the trees. She was dressed in her combat gear, dark armor with intricate designs that seemed to tell stories of her people's long history. But now her armor was damaged. One of the plates had a deep crack running through it. Her arm was wrapped in makeshift bandages. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had seen her in passing before, during brief meetings at the base. Elira was a legend among the Kailari known for her strength and skill in battle. She was also known for her stoic nature, never showing weakness. But now, as she approached him, there was something different in her eyes, something Jake couldn't quite place. "Human," she said, her voice deep and steady, though there was a hint of pain in it. "I need your help." She quickly moved towards her. "What happened?" he asked, his voice a little rougher than he intended. He wasn't used to seeing Kailar warriors in this state. They were always so strong, so unshakable. "I was in a skirmish. I need this fixed," Elira replied, nodding towards her damaged armor. "Can you do it?" Jake nodded, trying to push down the unease in his chest. He had repaired his own gear many times, but this was different. This was Elira. He could see the tension in her posture, the way she winced every time she moved her injured arm. She wasn't used to needing help, and that made Jake's job all the more important. He gestured for her to sit on a nearby rock. "Stay still," he said gently. "I'll get it done as quickly as I can." Elira hesitated for a moment before sitting down, carefully adjusting her armor. Jake crouched in front of her, pulling out his tools. The crack in her armor was deep, and the repairs would take time. As he worked, he couldn't help but glance up at her every now and then. Her eyes were fixed on the jungle ahead, her expression unreadable. Jake focused on his task, trying to ignore the feeling of being so close to her. He had always admired the Kailar's strength, but now that he was up close, he saw how much they hid behind their stoic masks. Beneath her hardened exterior, Elira was just as human as he was vulnerable, afraid, and in pain. Jake carefully smoothed out the crack in her armor, working with precision. The silence between them stretched on, neither of them speaking. It wasn't uncomfortable, but Jake could feel the weight of Elira's gaze. There was something in her eyes, something that made him feel like she was seeing more than just the soldier fixing her gear. When the patch was secure, Jake looked up. "It's done," he said, standing and wiping his hands on his pants. Elira stood slowly, her hand resting on her repaired armor. She moved cautiously, testing the fit. "Thank you, human," she said, her voice low. Jake nodded, though a part of him wanted to say more. He didn't know why, but there was a strange pull in his chest when he looked at her. He had seen many Kailar warriors before, but none like her. Elira was different. She had an aura of strength, but also a vulnerability that she kept hidden from the world. "You're welcome," he finally said. "Are you okay?" Elira turned to him, her eyes searching his face for a moment. For a brief second, Jake felt exposed, like she could see through his armor, just as easily as he had fixed hers. But then, she turned away and began walking toward the jungle. "I'll be fine," she replied, her tone more distant now. "I have a mission to complete." Jake stood there watching her leave, a strange feeling settling in his chest. He wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him, or the way her voice had trembled when she thanked him. There was something about Elira that he couldn't shake. He had always been focused on the mission, but now, for the first time, he felt like there was more at stake than just survival, as Alira disappeared into the jungle. Jake stood still for a moment longer. He had been trained to stay focused, to keep his emotions in check, but with her, it was different. There was something about her that made it hard to look away, hard to ignore the connection that was beginning to form between them. He shook his head, trying to clear the thoughts from his mind. "Focus," he muttered to himself. "Focus on the mission." But deep down, he knew that the mission was no longer just about fighting or surviving. It was about something else, something that had started with a simple question. And though Jake wasn't ready to face it, he could already feel it growing inside him. Whatever this was, it was only just beginning. The days that followed felt like a blur to Jake. His mission on the planet, once focused on aiding the Kailari, now seemed secondary to the strange feelings he couldn't ignore. Every time Alira crossed his path, his heart seemed to race, and it made him uneasy. He had been a soldier for too long to let emotions get in the way. But there was something about Alira, something that made him forget everything he knew about keeping his distance. Alira, on the other hand, seemed as composed. As ever, she was a warrior at heart, and nothing could change that. But Jake could see the quiet moments. The times when she would look off into the distance, lost in thoughts that she kept hidden. He had seen her train, fight, and command, but these quiet moments were something different. He wondered what haunted her, what made her so determined to never show weakness. They worked together on several more missions. Alira would often take the lead, as she was one of the top warriors in her people's army. Jake would follow her, always keeping an eye on her, ensuring her safety while trying to hide his growing affection. There were times when their hands would brush as they passed equipment to each other, and every time Jake's heart would skip a beat. But Alira never seemed to notice. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't acknowledge it. It wasn't just the missions that brought them closer, though Jake found himself talking to her more and more. Their conversations started with small talk about the weather or the mission, but soon they found themselves talking about more personal matters. Alira, who had once seemed so distant, began to open up little by little. She told Jake about her past, about the battles she had fought, the family she had lost, and the weight of being a warrior. She spoke of the Kailari's struggle to protect their lands, their people, and their way of life. She shared her fears, her hopes, and the burden she carried every day. It wasn't easy for her, but in these moments when they were alone, Alira allowed herself to be vulnerable. And Jake, despite his own fears, couldn't help but be drawn closer to her. He, too, shared stories of his life on Earth. He told her about his childhood, the quiet days with his family, and the way he had always felt like an outsider, even in his own world. He spoke of his training, how he had become a soldier, and how, despite the battlefields and missions, he often felt empty. There was always something missing, something he couldn't explain, till now. But even as their bond grew stronger, Jake still couldn't bring himself to admit what was happening. He had always told himself that his feelings for her were just admiration, respect for a fellow soldier. But deep down, he knew it was more. He was falling for her, and it scared him. One evening, after a long day of patrol, Jake and Alira sat outside the camp, the sun dipping below the horizon. The jungle was quiet, and the air was thick with the sounds of distant creatures. They sat side by side, neither speaking, but both feeling the weight of the moment. Jake glanced at Alira. She was staring ahead, her posture still strong, but there was a sadness in her eyes. It was the same sadness he had seen before, the one she tried so hard to hide. He wanted to ask her about it, to know what was going on inside her mind, but he spoke quietly. "You know, back on Earth, we don't have many quiet places like this. It's always busy, always noisy. I think that's why I came here, to find some peace." Alira turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. "And did you find it?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Jake hesitated. "I think I found something more," he said. "Something I didn't expect." Alira didn't say anything for a long moment. She seemed to be weighing his words, as if searching for their meaning. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not like the others. I've seen how humans fight, how they follow orders, but you." She trailed off, her eyes studying him carefully. "You don't seem like them? You think too much. You feel too much." Jake felt a lump form in his throat. "I'm not sure that's a good thing," he said quietly. Illyra tilted her head slightly. "It's not a weakness, if that's what you're thinking," she said, her voice steady. "Sometimes feeling too much is what makes us strong. It's what makes us human." Jake was taken aback by her words. He'd never thought of it that way. He had always believed that emotions were something to be controlled, to be kept under wraps. But Illyra's words struck a chord deep inside him, for the first time. Jake allowed himself to feel the truth of his emotions. He had been fighting it for so long, pushing it down, convincing himself that he couldn't afford to care. But here, in this quiet moment with Illyra, everything was different. She had made him see that it was okay to feel, to be vulnerable. And now he couldn't deny what was happening between them. As the evening wore on, they sat in silence, the weight of their unspoken words hanging in the air. Jake could feel the pull between them, the unspoken connection that had been growing since their first meeting. It was undeniable now. Illyra had made him realize something he had been afraid to face. He cared for her deeply, more than he ever thought possible. Illyra stood up suddenly, breaking the silence. "We should get some rest," she said, her voice back to its usual calm tone. "Tomorrow's mission won't wait." Jake nodded, though his mind was still racing. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. He stood up as well, but before he could walk away, Illyra turned to face him. For a moment, their eyes locked. There was something in her gaze, something that made Jake's heart race. It was as if she, too, was feeling the same things he was. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice almost hesitant. Jake gave her a small smile. "Anytime, Illyra." As they walked back to camp side by side, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. Their bond was no longer just about the mission, about being soldiers in a war. It was something deeper, something more personal. As much as Jake wanted to push it away, he knew that the next steps would be harder than he could ever have imagined. The mission had been long and exhausting. Jake and Illyra's unit had been sent to track a group of hostile aliens who had breached their territory. The jungle had been thick with mist, making every movement feel like a game of hide-and-seek. With danger lurking around every corner, Illyra, as always, had taken charge, leading the team with precision and determination. Jake followed her, focusing on his role, but always keeping an eye on her. It was late in the evening when they finally spotted the enemy camp. It was well guarded, with sentries posted at every corner. Jake's heart raced as the team moved into position, preparing for the attack. Illyra signaled for them to stay quiet, her sharp eyes scanning the area. She looked calm, as though she had done this 1,000 times. But Jake could see the tension in her stance. He had come to recognize the signs of worry in her, a small frown, the way her hands clenched slightly around her weapon. She wasn't as unaffected as she appeared. The attack was swift. The team moved in, silently taking out the sentries before engaging with the rest of the enemy forces. Jake fought alongside Illyra, feeling the rush of adrenaline in his veins. His movements were automatic, trained, but his mind kept returning to the moments they had shared. The quiet conversations, the way Illyra had opened up to him, the way she had looked at him when she whispered, "Do you love me, human?" The battle raged on, the sounds of gunfire and shouting filling the air. Jake kept his focus, watching Illyra as she fought with fierce skill. He admired her strength, but he also saw the way her movements grew more fluid, more desperate as the fight dragged on. She was a warrior, but even warriors had their limits. At one point, Illyra was knocked to the ground. A blast from an enemy weapon hit her shoulder, and she crumpled under the impact. Jake's heart stopped. He rushed to her side, pushing aside any thoughts of his own safety. He crouched down next to her, his hands shaking as he checked her injury. "Illyra," called out, his voice rough with panic. "Illyra, are you okay?" She groaned, her hand instinctively reaching for her shoulder, but she pushed him away with a grunt. "I'm fine," she muttered, her voice tight with pain. "We need to finish this." Jake wasn't convinced. He could see the blood staining, her armor, the way her breath came in short gasps. She wasn't fine, but there was no time to argue. The battle wasn't over, and they still had work to do. Reluctantly, Jake helped her back to her feet, supporting her as they continued to fight. The night seemed to stretch on forever. The enemy forces were relentless, but so were they. Finally, after what felt like hours, the last of the hostile aliens were defeated. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Jake's heavy breathing. Jake looked over at Alira. She stood tall, though her posture was stiff, and her movements were slower now. The injury on her shoulder was worse than she had let on, and the exhaustion on her face was unmistakable. Yet she didn't complain. She never did. "Are you okay?" Jake asked again, his voice soft but insistent. Alira gave him a sharp look, but there was no anger in it, only exhaustion. She didn't respond at first, her eyes scanning the area one last time to ensure they were safe. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than usual. "I'm fine," she said. Though Jake could hear the strain in her words, Jake stepped closer, reaching out to steady her. He couldn't stand seeing her like this, so strong on the outside, but so fragile underneath. "You don't have to pretend," he said, his voice gentle. "I've seen what you're capable of. I know you're not invincible." Lyra stiffened, but she didn't pull away. For a long moment, they just stood there, staring at each other. It was as though the world around them had faded, leaving only the two of them standing in the aftermath of the battle. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, and he knew that this moment, this silence, was the calm before the storm. Lyra sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I've spent my whole life pretending," she said softly. "I've had to. Show weakness, they'll see it, and they'll use it against me. My people don't have time for weakness. We have to be strong, or we don't survive." Jake's heart ached for her. He had seen the strength in her, the way she led her people with a fierceness that commanded respect. But he also saw the toll it had taken on her, could see it now, in the way her eyes seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 battles, 1,000 losses. "I don't think you're weak," he said quietly. "I think you're the strongest person I've ever met." Alira's eyes softened, just for a moment, before she turned away. "You don't know anything about strength," she muttered, though there was no bite to her words. "You think? Because I'm strong, I don't need help. But you're wrong. I'm just as human as you are." Jake felt his chest tighten. It wasn't what he had expected to hear, but it made sense. Alira wasn't some unbreakable warrior. She was someone who had been carrying her burdens alone for far too long, afraid to let anyone in. And Jake, he didn't want to be just another person. She shut out. "I can help," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not going anywhere, not this time." Alira looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as though trying to decide if she could trust him. After a long pause, she nodded, though she didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her silence said more than words ever could. Jake reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder, the one that had been injured. Alira winced, but she didn't pull away. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean into the support he offered. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For both of them. And then, just as Jake thought she would pull away, Alira turned to him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart race. "Do you love me, human?" she whispered again, her voice barely audible above the sounds of the jungle. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't sure if he was ready for anything, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was between them, it was real. He couldn't deny it any longer. "I don't know," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "but I care. About you. More than I thought possible." Alira didn't respond. She didn't need to. The air between them was thick with understanding. For now, that was enough. The days that followed the battle were quieter, but Jake couldn't shake the feelings that had been building inside him. Every time Alira spoke, every time their eyes met, he felt a pull that he couldn't explain. She had trusted him enough to lean on him for support, and that was something he hadn't expected. But it also made him question everything he thought he knew about himself, about her, and about the path ahead. The mission was far from over. Jake and Alira had to remain focused, especially with the threat still looming. The alien forces they had been fighting were not easily defeated, and there was always the risk of another attack. The pressure weighed heavily on everyone, but Jake found it especially difficult when it came to Alira. She had always been the leader, the one who carried the weight of her people's survival on her shoulders. Jake admired her strength, but the more he learned about her, the more he saw the cracks in her armor. It wasn't just the physical wounds she had suffered, it was the emotional toll, the weight of responsibility that she had carried alone for so long. He could see it in the way she pushed herself harder than anyone else, refusing to show weakness, refusing to ask for help. Jake wasn't sure if he could live with himself if he didn't do something about it. He couldn't continue pretending that he wasn't feeling something for her. The more time he spent with Alira, the more he realized that what he had been feeling was more than just admiration or respect. It was something deeper, something he had never allowed himself to feel before. One evening, after a long day of reconnaissance, Jake found himself alone with Alira. The rest of the team was back at the camp, preparing for the next phase of their mission. Jake had been trying to find the right moment, but the truth was, he was terrified. He wasn't sure how to tell her what was in his heart, or if she even felt the same way. Alira was sitting by the fire, cleaning her weapon, the flames casting shadows across her face. She was as focused as ever, but there was a weariness too. Her movements? Jake hesitated for a moment, but then he walked over and sat down beside her. For a moment neither of them spoke. Jake took a deep breath. "Alira," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had been thinking. "We need to talk." Alira didn't look at him right away, but she nodded, setting her weapon down on the ground. Her hands were still, but Jake could tell she was bracing herself for whatever was coming next. "What is it, human?" she asked, her tone calm but guarded. Jake started, his words faltering. He wasn't used to this, wasn't used to feeling so vulnerable. "I can't keep pretending," he said, the words finally tumbling out. "I can't keep pretending that what's happening between us doesn't matter. It does. It matters more than anything." Alira's eyes flicked to him, but she didn't say anything. Her expression was unreadable, and Jake wasn't sure if she was angry or surprised or something else entirely. But he couldn't stop now. "I care about you, Alira," Jake continued, his voice shaking slightly. "I care about you in a way I've never cared about anyone before, and I can't hide it anymore. Not sure if that's love. Maybe it is. But what I do know is that I don't want to lose you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a long moment Alira didn't speak. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for her response. He didn't know what he expected. Danger, confusion, rejection, or maybe even something else, but the silence was unbearable. Finally, Alira spoke, her voice low and steady. "Do you think you can just say those things and make everything okay?" Looked at her, his stomach tightening. "I don't know what I'm doing, Alira," he admitted. "I've never been in a situation like this. I don't have the answers. But I know that I can't keep pretending that I don't care about you. I can't pretend that this isn't real." Alira stood up suddenly, her face hardening as she had turned away from him. Jake watched as she paced a few steps before stopping, her back to him. He could feel the tension in the air, like something was about to break. "You don't understand?" Alira said, her voice thick with emotion. "You think you can just fix things with words? But you don't know what it's like to carry the weight I carry. I've lost so much, Jake. My people, my family, everything. I can't afford to let anyone in. I can't afford to feel anything. Because every time I do, I lose someone. And I don't want to lose you too." Jake stood up, his heart aching for her. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said, his voice firm. "You don't have to shut everyone out. I'm here. I want to be here for you. I'm not going anywhere." Alira turned to face him, her eyes blazing with intensity. "What?" "Don't understand. You can't. You're not Kailari. You're not like me." Jake stepped closer to her, his gaze softening. "Maybe I'm not like you, but I'm not just some human soldier either. I've seen things. I've lost people, too, and I'm not asking you to open up to me all at once. I'm just asking you to let me be there for you. Let me help carry that weight, even if it's just a little." For a long moment, Alira said nothing. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of pain and uncertainty, as if she was battling something deep inside her. And then finally she lowered her gaze, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "I don't know how to let someone in," she whispered, "but maybe I can try." Jake's heart swelled with relief. He reached out and gently placed his hand on her arm, offering the support she had never asked for, but so clearly needed. "You don't have to do it alone," Jake said softly. "Not anymore." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for something, maybe reassurance, maybe understanding. And in that moment, Jake knew that they were both at a crossroads. There was no turning back now, no pretending that the bond between them was just a passing thing. It was real, and it was growing stronger with every passing day. And whatever came next, Jake was ready to face it. Together. The days following their conversation were tense, but the air between Jake and Alira had changed. There was still the same unspoken bond, but now it was different. There was no more pretending. Both of them had acknowledged what they were feeling, and that brought its own set of challenges. They couldn't just ignore it anymore. Jake tried to focus on the mission, but his mind often wandered back to Alira. They spent more time together, working side by side, and their relationship grew stronger with every passing day. Jake saw a side of Alira that few others had. Behind her warrior persona was a person who longed for peace, for understanding, for connection. Alira, too, began to open up more. At first, she was hesitant, still holding back part of herself, but slowly, she began to trust Jake more. She shared her fears, her doubts, and her worries about the future. Jake listened carefully, offering words of comfort whenever he could. It wasn't always easy, but it was enough for her to begin letting down her walls, one evening after another. Successful mission, they sat by the fire again, just like before. But this time, there was a new comfort between them. The silence was no longer awkward, but peaceful, as if they both had finally accepted that their bond was real. Jake looked at Alira, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. She looked so different now than when they had first met. Then, she was a fierce warrior, always on guard. Now, there was a gentleness to her, a softness that he hadn't expected to see. "Alira," Jake began, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, about being human, about the weight we carry." Alira didn't look up immediately, but he could tell she was listening. She had been silent for a moment, her eyes distant. "And?" she asked, her tone soft. Jake hesitated, unsure of how to put his thoughts into words. He had never been good with expressing his feelings, especially when it came to something as important as this. But for the first time he realized it didn't matter if he didn't have the perfect words. What mattered was being honest. "I think I've been carrying my own weight too," Jake said, his eyes on the fire. "I've always tried to push away my feelings, telling myself that I had to focus on the mission, that I couldn't afford to get attached. But now, with you, it's different. I don't want to run from this anymore, from us." Alira's gaze flickered to him, and Jake could see the vulnerability in her eyes. "And what about the war?" she asked softly. "What about the battles we still have to fight?" Jake shrugged slightly, his eyes meeting hers. "We don't know what's going to happen next, but I do know this. I want to be with you. I don't want to let fear control me anymore." There was a long pause, and Jake could feel his heart pounding in his chest. It wasn't an easy thing to say. He had spent so much of his life trying to keep his emotions in check, to stay focused. But now, with Alira, it felt right to speak the truth. Alira sat in silence for a while, her expression unreadable. Jake could tell she was thinking, processing what he had said. The flickering light from the fire danced across her features, making her look almost otherworldly. But there was no hiding the sadness in her eyes. It's the same sadness he had seen from the beginning. "I've spent so long pushing people away," Lyra said quietly, her voice low. "I thought it was the only way to protect myself. But you make it hard to ignore what I'm feeling." She hesitated, as if unsure of how much more to say. "I'm scared, Jake. Scared that if I let you in, I'll lose you too. I can't afford to lose anyone else." Jake's heart tightened at her words. He had known that she carried so much weight, but hearing her speak about it openly made it all the more real. Lyra wasn't just a warrior. She was someone who had lost, someone who had fought to survive. And all that time, she had been keeping her pain locked away, refusing to let anyone in. "I don't want to be a reason for you to be afraid," Jake said softly, reaching out to gently take her hand. "I want to be someone you can lean on. Someone you can trust." Lyra didn't pull away, and for a moment she just stared at their joined hands. Her grip tightened slightly, and Jake could feel the warmth of her touch. She finally looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "I'm not sure how to do this," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "I've never let anyone close, not like this, but maybe I can try." Jake smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said, his voice steady. "You don't have to have all the answers right. Now, just ... let me in when you're ready." "That's enough for me," Lyra nodded, her eyes softening. For the first time since they had met, Jake saw a flicker of hope in her expression. It wasn't a bright, all-consuming light, but it was there, small and tentative, like a candle flame struggling to stay alight in the wind. And for now, that was enough. They sat there in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. The weight of their conversation hung in the air, but there was a sense of peace between them now. They weren't rushing to figure everything out. They were just ... together. And that was a start, as the fire flickered one last time before dying down. Jake felt a sense of calm wash over him. He didn't have all the answers, and neither did Lyra, but for the first time he realized that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that they were willing to face the uncertainty together, and that was enough. The days after their conversation were filled with both uncertainty and hope. Jake and Lyra continued to work together, side by side, but there was an unspoken change between them. The connection they shared was stronger now, more open, but it wasn't easy. There were still walls to break down, fears to face, and feelings to sort through. But for the first time in a long time, they were both willing to try. Their days were filled with training and missions, the rhythm of life in the midst of a war. Lyra led the team with her usual strength, but Jake noticed how she would glance back at him sometimes, as if checking in. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot to him. He, in turn, made sure she knew he was there, offering help whenever she needed it, supporting her even when she didn't ask. It wasn't much, but it was their way of showing that they were in this together. The nights were different. When the rest of the team was asleep, Jake and Lyra would find time to sit by the fire, talking quietly, sharing small moments. They didn't rush into deep conversations. Instead, they found comfort in the simple things, the way the fire crackled, the sound of the jungle at night, and the quiet space between them where words weren't always necessary. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, they sat outside the camp watching the stars. The air was cool, a light breeze brushing against their skin. Lyra sat close, her gaze fixed on the sky, but Jake could tell her mind was elsewhere. She hadn't spoken much that day, and he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Another long day," Jake said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "You okay?" Lyra turned her head to look at him, her eyes tired but still sharp. "I'm fine," she replied, but Jake could hear the strain in her voice. She wasn't fine, not really. She had been carrying too much for too long, and he knew that, but he also knew she wouldn't admit it easily. Jake shifted slightly, sitting a little closer to her. "You don't always have to pretend, you know? You can talk to me. We don't have to hide anything anymore." Lyra didn't respond right away. She seemed to be weighing his words, as if deciding whether to open up. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "It's hard, Jake. The weight of it all never gets easier." Jake looked at her, his heart aching for her. He reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. She tensed for a moment but didn't pull away. He didn't need her to say anything. He just wanted her to know that he was there, that she didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. "You don't have to do it all by yourself," Jake said quietly. "I'm here. I want to be here at Lyra for you, in whatever way you need." Lyra met his gaze, her eyes softening, just for a moment. "I'm not used to this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always had to be strong, If I let go, even for a second, I'm afraid I'll fall apart. Jake squeezed her shoulder gently. You don't have to let go all at once. You don't have to be strong all the time. It's okay to lean on someone. She took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as if releasing some of the tension she had been carrying. Maybe I'm starting to believe that, she said, her voice quieter now, more open. Maybe I'm starting to believe in us. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't realized just how much he needed to hear her say that until now. They were both still figuring things out, still learning how to trust each other. But hearing her acknowledge what they had shared made everything feel a little more real. Us, Jake repeated, his voice filled with quiet emotion. I like the sound of that. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of their words hanging in the air. There were still so many uncertainties, so many challenges ahead. But for the first time, Jake felt like they were facing them together, side by side. And that made everything seem a little bit easier. As the fire began to die down, Lyra shifted, standing up and stretching her arms above her head. We should get some rest, she said, her voice a little lighter than before. Tomorrow's mission is going to be just as tough. Jake nodded, standing up as well. Right, but we've got this, he said with a smile, together. Lyra smiled back, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from her in days. It was small, but it reached her eyes. And for the first time, Jake could see the relief there. Maybe she was starting to believe in what they had to. As they made their way back to camp, Jake felt a renewed sense of hope. The journey ahead would be difficult. He had a war to fight, a future to figure out, and so many unanswered questions. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was enough.